Good morning, everybody. I trust you can hear me on this microphone. Hey, Moomjian, no chatting. Okay, my title today is The Drilling Business Model, and my challenge here is it a driver or inhibitor of performance and innovation? So, my opening slide is welcome to the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is an obvious truth that is being ignored or going unaddressed. When I see what happens in the industry, when I talk to different people, this keeps coming up, but I don't hear people who are saying we're going out to address this. And what are the issues that need addressing? I put it to you, there's no direct rewards for technology and performance enhancement. There are in certain cases, but generally in the model in the industry, they're not there. And secondly, drilling systems automation needs an integrator and rewards. This has come up time and time again. So it's the structure of the business model and how it will be rewarded that will drive drilling systems automation and yield the advantages from it. So I'd like to do my presentation in reverse order. I mean, I wonder why we're going to wait for the punchline. We might just as well get into it and then back it up. So what I'll start with is a blueprint for the successful business model as I see it. And then I'll talk about some contracting practices affecting performance to show some different setups here. And then I'll talk about organizational architecture. And this comes from lean manufacturing and systems thinking. And I put up there that lovely picture of the golden nugget, as Mario often refers to it. In this presentation, this is the golden nugget. This is the piece to take away as a foundation of doing things better. And then the tender process. Let's talk about it. Is it about money or is it about value? How are these being weighed up when companies go through that process? And the general contractor. The general contractor is the company that is actually going to execute and construct the well. And the challenge I lay out there, who is performing this role in the operations in your standard contracts? And then lessor or operator. We know the aviation model. These airlines fly around. They've painted all their lovely logos on the plane, but they don't own the damn thing. Somebody else owns it, and they lease it to them, these very large financing companies. And they brand it as their own, and then they put it out in the market, and they operate it. Are people with drilling units, are they a lessor, or are they an operator? And then the history that brought us here. I started out, the papers are supposed to be about 7,000 words. I got a little carried away. This paper's over 12,000 words. And a part of this is the history. I go back to the 1930s in this paper and build up a history which I think some of you will find quite fascinating reading. The history about the oil companies having their drilling rigs and then creating drilling contractors and the type of contracts they created when they created drilling contractors. And also there are 33 references. So if you want to dig into this to go and find out material backing it up, there's plenty of opportunity. So, pointing the way with my friends there from Africa. So here's an overview of the blueprint. We start out, what is the owner value? What is it that the owner wants to create in the well that they are going to be constructing? And then what we want to do is to design the organization architecture that will deliver that. That is the way that the organization should work. And this organization involves multiple players. That then defines who is the general contractor, who is going to take the lead role of delivering this well construction, who is the integrator. And then we can put key performance indicators into place. And now we can start putting measurements that will align people to the owner's value, aligned through the general contractor. Then we can put critical management processes into place. So these are things such as scheduling, risk management, cost estimation, and cost control, which is a piece we often forget. We estimate the costs and have a look later on, but we're not controlling them through the process. Thereafter, we can define the scope of work and payment schemes. And it's only when you get to this point that you can actually say, what are the right scopes of work that will fit this architecture and align to my KPIs that will deliver the value that I want? And if you haven't done this, you're just taking a Xerox copy of a contract off the shelf and force-fitting it into your business. This will deliver you the highest net value. So if I pick out the key steps in this, design a comprehensive organization architecture. As I said, this is the way that the organization will work. What is it you want to deliver, and what are the subsystems that will deliver that? And if you build up a tiered organization of systems and subsystems, you can build a model that will deliver value. Design the interdependencies. There are interdependencies within that structure, but also within that architecture, but also there are significant interdependencies between subsurface and production. Because subsurface are generating you your targets as to where you're going to place the well, which causes the design of the well and the way you want to drill the well. And then you have interdependencies with production who will take the well and operate it later on. And if you can really resolve those interdependencies, you can create a lot more value. If you just chuck it over the fence, you get subsurface people designing well trajectories that are crazy and cost you a lot of extra money. And it happens. Don't tell me that doesn't happen. It happens. They love drawing well trajectories. Define the general contractor. So this is the company or the group that is actually going to execute this well and take responsibility for doing it. Define the measures. So you can define the value delivery, and through the organization architecture, you can now put key performance indicators in place that make sense because they are aligned. And each system actually has a deliverable. Because it has a deliverable, it owns what it can deliver, and now you can put performance indicators on that. And the alignment through the architecture will align to what the owner wants to have as his value. Design these critical management processes. I think a lot of times we don't do enough work on defining the schedules for these complex projects. I mean, deep offshore wells or multiple land wells are quite complex projects with lots going on, especially on the logistics side. And you need detailed planning and scheduling to execute that properly. And then you can define the scope of work and the key performance indicators and the reward structures in your contracts. As I say, it's at this point that you can say, what is it I want somebody contracted to do? How will I tell them the measure of performance I wish to have? And how can I reward paying them for actually achieving that performance I wish to have? I mean, one of the most advanced companies in the world for organizational effectiveness is Toyota, and their Toyota production system, which created lean manufacturing, actually organizes all of this. And they go through a process of insourcing and outsourcing so that they balance the workload into these subsystems and that people are owning delivering a whole deliverable within a subsystem, and they put performance measures throughout the system. They agree the performance measures with the supplier, and they reward them for achieving those performance measures. Then the big issue, I think, is to distinguish the role of lesser of drilling units and performance driller. For sure, there's some people out there who are performance drillers, and you can distinguish them. You just have to look across the US at the performance of drilling wells in the US, and you can identify drilling contractors who are extremely high performers in certain areas, and you can recognize that. But if you look at a lot of the other pieces of the business, you're actually looking at a lessor of a drilling unit. And then the question is, who is going to actually own the performance and operate that? And that's where you need to have the general contractor in place, whether it's yourself doing it or another third party doing it. And then you can award on highest net value. I think a lot of people don't do enough work on evaluating their contracts on what's the net value going to be produced. And they typically go for low price. So my big message is don't award on low price. Build yourself some models, build some sensitivities into them, and then figure out who's going to deliver you the most value. And it won't necessarily be the lowest bidder, that's for sure. Include the planning phase in the operations. So now when you've got this organization architecture, you've contracted the people in place properly, you need to include them in planning, because if they're responsible for execution and they haven't been involved in planning, you cannot hold them responsible for that performance. If you define how they're going to do the execution, tell them to do it, and you don't understand their business properly, you'll get it wrong. And then treat everybody as part of your well delivery team. If you've contracted them in, you now want them aligned with you, make them part of your team. If you look at good drilling performance operations, you will find all the people feel part of one big team. And that's very critical to get them involved. Unfortunately, I think you often get to this point and find out that your supply chain management group alienated that company way at the beginning with the bidding process. And then develop a strong relationship between the on-site and the execution team. The on-site execution team and the office-based team. The office-based team's doing the planning. That plan must be owned by the on-site team. If you don't go through a process to gain that ownership, why should they bother to execute it? As we heard yesterday in the DSAT's presentation, if you go and tell somebody how to do their job, that's the fastest way of having the operation ruined. If we look back at what's affected change in the past, when oil companies outsourced their rigs to create drilling contractors, and there's lots of brand name companies that came from that process, they actually outsourced on footage contracts and turnkey. And then the footage got displaced with day rate contracts as there were more variations coming in. So the transition went through the industry. I'm talking back from the 1930s here. And in fact, recently, the footage contracts have dropped off. I checked with someone who follows these statistics. It's referenced in the paper, and they said they have dropped off now. But what's happening is these integrated project management and integrated project services contracts are growing, and they're growing quite significantly. I don't think anybody's tracked the actual numbers on these, but when I talk around to people and start putting it together, the size on my plot there is quite relevant. It's a significant percentage of the business, particularly in land drilling internationally, and as such, it's penetrated the market. Contracting practices. How do we get this alignment with performance? In my diagram here, I've got degree of outsourcing at the top. I've got degree of performance payment on the right. I've got breadth of service on the left and delegation of control at the bottom, and that little blue wiggle in the middle is a day rate contract. We don't do a lot of outsourcing in it. It doesn't have a large breadth of service. There's no delegation of control, basically, and the degree of performance payment is nothing. If we step up to what's called well management contracts, where somebody takes over the role of the operator and performs that for them to operate the well, what we see is a large breadth of service. We see the degree of outsourcing goes up and the delegation of control goes up, but very often we do not see any degree of performance payment. If you then go into integrated project services, you see a similar profile to well management, but the breadth of service is less. If you now go to integrated project management, you see the degree of outsourcing is significant. It is outsourced. I want to buy 300 wells from you for $300 million or whatever the deal is. The breadth of service is significant. It's not necessarily 100% of the whole well construction, but it's very significant. The delegation of control has gone up, and with it, the degree of performance payment. And then if you get into what's emerging now as production enhancement contracts, where companies have contracts that start out for a couple of years evaluation phase and then go into 25 to 30-year contracts to enhance mature field production, what you see is this profile. Significant performance payment. It's all related to what you can produce out of these fields. The breadth of service is up, the degree of outsourcing is up, and the delegation of control. So what you can see is a transition between these different kinds of contracts, and the day rate is that very little piece in the middle. Organizational architecture. So this comes from lean manufacturing and from systems thinking. It is not an organogram. I, for one, I tell people regularly, I hate organograms. People draw organograms, all they do is cause problems. His box is bigger than mine, his is high, he's got more people, whatever else it is. It is about the way the organization works. And in order to define that, you need to look at what's the information, who's involved, what is the work being undertaken, and what's the technology. And when you group that together in a system, you can define a deliverable from it. And then when you define a series of these, you can go and deliver well construction. And the question is, how do you organize these? It does vary from project to project. It's not just go and copy it and paste it in somewhere else. And some examples I can give you is working with subsurface is actually their deliverable is to reduce subsurface uncertainty. In your world of well construction, that's what you want them to do. The less uncertainty there is, the easier it is to design the well and to execute it. Data acquisition one. Well placement. I don't talk to people about directional drilling because you can directional drill all day long. What you really want is well placement. And then the question is, how are you defining that? How do you plan it and how do you execute it? Your end goal is to put that well in the right place, however you are defining that. The tender process, is it saving costs or is it killing value? I throw up here sort of generic terms of independents versus large operators, and this is just kind of my two boxes I'm throwing this into. As far as I know, independents, the operations department is basically the buyer. People I've talked to say, the operations people go out and buy what they want and then they execute with that service. In the large operators, it's the supply chain management department. They control, and I use the word control here, they control the tender process. I've seen some serious shifts from the late 80s, early 90s to today where this has all moved right into sometimes finance, but most often supply chain management department, and they totally control it, even to the extent that we'll give you the contract when we've got it signed and you'll know who you're using and you can go plan your well. The operations department on the independents focuses on well cost and value. The supply chain department, focuses on low cost, and their business is commoditization. If they can commoditize what they're buying, they can drive the cost down. What I find really interesting is I've seen managers in supply chain management departments get bonuses for reducing costs, while the wells turned into absolute disasters. So well costs roared up, NPT was huge, but these people saved money and got huge bonuses. That's not alignment. And then the scope of work for the independents, I believe, is related to the project. People own this project and they're getting the right kind of work done. Mostly when you've got supply chain management department, it's not structured to the project. It's using standard scopes of work, and a lot of people these days are walking around with thumb drives, taking it, sticking it in their computer, and using the one they used in their last company and just changing the company name. It's basically Xerox engineering. There's a guy called Mero who runs IPA. He collects data from the oil community on all these projects. He's published a couple of papers and he's published a book. And he puts all the statistics in from oil company data. And he is very clear with his output on those facts and figures. Projects based on low bids failed. Absolute categoric, and it's oil company data. Who is the general contractor? Well, if you look at IPM and PEC, it's very clear. There is a company who took the responsibility to deliver those wells. They are the general contractor. When it gets to day rate contracts, I think it's unclear. You talk about these assigned responsibilities, who's actually doing what, and I think that leads to lots of confusion in how the projects are being run. There's different operators assert their roles in different ways, so the suppliers are dealing with operators who step in and take control and other ones who go much more hands-off and expect you to take the lead. And it lacks a distinction between engineering, construction, and commissioning. The reason I put that in there is that one of Mero's findings is that when engineering is combined with the construction, you get projects that fail. Projects that succeed are where engineering is distinguished from construction, and hence you can end up putting the general contractor in the middle of this. If you look at drilling systems automation, it requires an integrator. Our business is fragmented, and we have huge interoperability issues. On the DSA Roadmap initiative that I'm one of the 3 leaders of, we had a presentation from a major operator about working on automating well control. And the bottom line was, it's going to take them to 7 to 10 years to do this because of the fragmented nature of the business. And when we asked, what happens if our business wasn't so fragmented? If you had an integrated system, he said 3 to 5 years. So basically his judgment is you could cut the time for automating well control in half by actually organizing the business properly. Then you end up with a general contractor can solve these issues. There is an analogy that back in the 1960s, early 70s, an English company that built complex chemical plants actually created their own subsidiary company that was the general contractor and built the plants. And they went from chemical plants that were behind schedule, over cost, and didn't operate properly, to chemical plants that were on schedule, within cost, and operated properly. So there is a model out there where some of the major operators could actually set up their own general contractor as a wholly owned subsidiary, and then they wouldn't have to have this worry about outsourcing it to a third party. They own them. Lessor or driller. So I come back to this one. The standardization of drill ships has created the ability to deliver these highly expensive, pretty complex machines on schedule and on budget. And what's happened is new players have come in. Financiers have come into the business and they're buying these, and you get new companies popping up. These people are financing assets. I don't believe they are necessarily drilling contractors. The financial markets, every time you look at a major drilling contractor with a deep water drilling unit and you look at the analyst's view of it, they're looking at EBITDA. How much money are they earning out of this asset which they invested in? And this comes down to utilization and day rates. So basically, the longer you keep it utilized, the better off you are being judged by the financial markets. Obviously, I agree, reputation and safety, for safety and reliability, do drive the ability to get contracts. So that is a significant contributor to utilizing your units. But do you want to get off contract earlier by a faster well? Yes or no? I raise that question. So my thing is the drilling contractor you're using more of a lessor than a driller? And if they're more of a lessor, I think you need a general contractor to get your hands around that business and to maximize the performance out of those assets on your own behalf. So the blueprint overview. My message, yes, the traditional drilling business model is an inhibitor of performance and innovation. Some people may disagree, but I know a large number of people I've talked to out there who do agree with this. Highest net value, you get it by defining the scope of work, the payment schemes properly, aligned with your KPIs, critical management processes, and it all hangs off this organization architecture. And that gives the owner value, and you need a general contractor to run the business. Hope you're having fun. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Great presentations. Is there any questions? Go ahead.
John, I'd like to thank you for an interesting and thought-provoking presentation. I'm going to preface my question with two yogiisms from Yogi Berra. One is deja vu all over again. And the second is, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. My question is, having been in this business for over 35 years, it seems that the same theories and concepts are continuously reoccurring. To me, this is somewhat reminiscent of drilling in the 90s, and I know that you were very actively involved in developing that program while you were with Shell. Well, drilling in the 90s, I think everybody would agree, failed. That was a concept where the driller would serve as a general contractor, bring in all the service companies, manage the project. It wasn't turnkey drilling. It wasn't footage drilling, but it was a general contractor role. I guess my question is, can you draw a distinction pointing out the similarities and the differences between the failed drilling in the 90s and the concept that you're advocating?
Well, firstly, I'll take a point with you that I don't believe drilling in the 90s failed. And that is your perception. I think that what you see with the integrated project management proves that it is there, it is alive today. It took a period of time to establish itself, and it is growing very significantly. So that has become established. I think the question for the operator is, how do you gain the benefits of that model by organizing your business so you have the alignment with your suppliers and they feel they have a reward for improving performance? And these IPM contracts are not only NOCs, they're IOCs, and they are growing.
I'll follow that with just one observation. Having been on the drilling side my entire career, and I do remember when Shell invited a number of drillers and service companies to Holland for a presentation and rollout of drilling in the 90s, and one of the contractors, Parker Drilling, had a presentation that said, day work works. And you and I may differ, but I think that that concept has proven itself far more than some form of integration, general contractor, strategic alliance, and the like. But I do agree with you that there's probably some hybrid form that might prove to be more efficient and beneficial to all parties?
Well, if you read the paper, you can actually read about alliances and why alliances fail. I mean, this paper got so long, I'd have no time to cover the whole topic. And also I dig into Merrill's work, because he actually has covered that. And if you look back in the history of our industry and why it failed and what his statistics show, you can understand it, and then you can understand how to move forward and why this blueprint has value. And it's organizational architecture, Carrie. It's not lawyers.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. I work for an independent operator, and my question has to do with, as we all know, conditions change when you're executing a construction of a well. You've got your planning, engineering leadership, and then you've got your general contractor, like you state, which is kind of typically an operations manager. One thing that I'm curious is who makes those final decisions when conditions change, because oftentimes you have to re-engineer or re-plan things. And I think you didn't really address it. I'm curious if you address it in your paper, because I think it's one of the biggest points of conflict as an operator.
Right. Couple of points on that one. One is, if you properly plan an operation and you do a lot of detailed scheduling, you should be building contingency plans for those things that you believe have a reasonable probability of occurring. And in those contingency plans, you can do a cost evaluation as to whether it's a plan on the shelf, you make some calls and you mobilize something, or whether it's a plan on the rig that the equipment's already there. I've worked on some operations with some folks in this room where in the morning the rig did the daily report and said we plug and played contingency plan number 2, and they didn't need to call anybody in the night. Now, when you get out of that bounds and you say, hey, I have no longer a contingency plan for what has occurred, the best thing I believe to do is you stop, you make the situation safe, you analyze it, and you replan. And then you may have to get back to your engineering group to look at, is it impacting well design, or is it a replan of something I didn't think about? When you have a good plan, move ahead, you'll be far more successful than what we used to do back in the 70s. I mean, circulate bottoms up till morning, right? You were in good shape then, huh?
Thank you. I have a second question. Thought it was interesting that you followed a presentation on Macondo, and I didn't see a lot of mention of safety or a reduction of risk in your model. I was just curious if you talk about that in your paper, if you want to elaborate on that.
Oh, I think if you build I've done this for years, right? If you build this organization alignment, the people who are delivering the service to you understand what your KPIs are. And for sure, safety is rated very highly. So safety is in your KPIs. If you have a very good plan and it's actually owned by the people on the rig, they're going to execute far better than when they don't understand the background to the plan, when they're not involved in it, when the work is not organized properly. Who's doing what? And that's when things fall through the gaps.
Jan Brakel with Shell. John, thanks for your thought-provoking presentation and passionately presented, as always. I like the concept that you presented. I think it makes good sense. What I'm not entirely clear of is who you expect to take the first step in this. At what party is this directed? To be the general contractor, or put that in place, or be the integrator? Can you elaborate on that, please?
This model works for the IPM companies, right? So, okay, they can take this and use this for themselves. In my view, this model works for the operators. And if the operator looks at the model and then starts to use it to define its contracts and define who is in that role of general contractor, and there's one operator, we've had this discussion, they stand up and say, it's me, I do that, right? Is to then define who is taking that role and run your business that way. I think you'll see significant improvement. It's up to the operator, if you want to do it, to do it.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, John. Let's give John a round of applause.